Now, the Human Rights Project is guided by the United Nations Convention for Persons with Disabilities. The Human Rights Project was founded in 2015 under the Namibian Federation of the Visually Impaired in order to cater for the needs of visually impaired persons in Namibia. Joining us with more details on matters pertaining to the rights of visually impaired persons in Namibia is Human Rights Project Manager Mwaka Mutenda-Mukweli. Good morning, ma'am, and welcome to Good Morning Namibia.
Good morning, sir, and thank you for having me.
How are you doing on this gift of a Tuesday morning?
I'm doing very well, thank you.
Talk to us about how the organization, specifically the Federation, has evolved since inception.
Okay. The Namibian Federation was established in 1986 with the aim of catering for the needs of visually impaired persons. And its objectives, amongst others, are to lobby and advocate for the rights of persons with visual impairments, and also to create awareness on issues pertaining to visually impaired persons, and to provide accessible information to visually impaired persons in Braille, large print, and audio. The Namibian Federation so far has grown to an extent that it has established 5 regional associations throughout the country, and these associations are headed or coordinated by regional coordinators. And it also has established a massaging project whereby it's training visually impaired persons in massaging, and it's actually a trainer of trainers project, whereby those that are trained are also going to train others, and also the handcraft. So in actual sense, the Namibian Federation has really accomplished incredible, achievements. And
made significant strides indeed.
Yes.
Now, from our understanding, the Human Rights Project resorts under the Federation. Talk to us about the strides relating specifically to the Human Rights Project since its inception in 2015.
Okay. As you alluded to earlier, the human rights is guided by the UNCRPD, which is the United Convention for Persons with Disabilities. And it focuses mainly on 4 articles from the UNCRPD, which is now accessibility, education, health, and employment. And in these areas, Human Rights Project since 2015 has really recorded remarkable achievements in the sense that we have managed to train visually impaired persons, communities and decision makers, and most of our visually impaired persons are today employed in different organizations, and some of them have graduated with tertiary educational institutions.
Wow.
Yeah.
That is quite impactful.
Yes.
Now, apart from those rights that you alluded to that we are deriving from the international instrument, Namibia is also a constitutional democracy, and Chapter 3 of the Constitution provides for certain entrenched rights for all Namibians. Yeah. It may seem obvious, but some may not be familiar with the rights, specifically accruing to visually impaired persons. Please talk to us about those.
Okay. Visually impaired persons are also entitled to rights, just like able-bodied persons, in the sense that when it comes to, for example, employment, they have the right to occupy a position of their choice as long as they are comfortable with it. And they also are entitled to financial independence. Those are some of their rights. And they are entitled to, getting married, starting a family of their own, and even to privacy. And, those are some of the areas that they are entitled to.
That's quite important.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, even in 2022, access to buildings, accessibility in general,
Yes.
remains a challenge also in our country, also at buildings, even in the capital. Talk to us about how big a challenge that is. We understand you'll also be hosting a conversation about that.
Yes. Accessibility is a challenge in the sense that if I can speak in the context of our city, we still have a number of buildings, structures that are not accessible to persons with visual impairments or disability in particular. And there seems to be, slow when it comes to the response in terms of, rectifying all these errors. But I can say that we have some institutions that have really, really responded to the UNCRPD in terms of correcting these errors. And if I can mention a few, like the University of Namibia is really striving towards ensuring that they satisfy the needs of persons with disabilities in terms of accessibility.
As a bare minimum, what needs to be in place at any building specifically for visually impaired persons?
Okay. In Windhoek, we have tall buildings. For one to go to the first or second floor, you need to use an elevator. And for example, if a visually impaired person is alone, it would be very difficult for them to, operate or use that elevator without a talking device or without braille buttons, because visually impaired persons read, with braille, so they have to press the button and feel that this is floor number 1, button number 2, and when it gets to a certain floor, the elevator must indicate to the visually impaired person that they've arrived to floor number 3, which is not the case in most of our buildings in Windhoek. Yeah.
And the challenge is, of course, even bigger if the person is both visually impaired but also hearing impaired.
Yes, it's very bigger, because when a person is both hearing and visually impaired, it means they use tactile, which is another form of communication. But when in terms of using an elevator, they will still need braille, even though they may not be able to hear the talking device, but they will still at least be able to press and get to the floor where they intend to get.
Just very briefly, and pardon my ignorance, what exactly is tactile?
Tactile is a form of communication or language which is used by both hearing and visually impaired persons. Because a person is not able to hear or see, they may not be able to understand when a person, or hear when a person is speaking. So they use a certain language whereby they touch, they feel.
Wow.
Yes, that's tactile.
Thank you. Does the Federation also strive to integrate guide dogs as part of their programs?
Yes. Last year, my director and myself had a brief meeting with our Disability Deputy Minister, Honorable Alexia Ngobe, on the formulation of the dog bill, which is on the use of guide dogs by visually impaired persons and wheelchair users. And
we're making progress in that regard?
Yes, last year, organizations of persons with disabilities were requested to provide input towards this dog bill. And so far, organizations have responded. I believe they are busy with the incorporation of this information from OPDs, Organizations of Persons with Disabilities.
Fingers crossed for the speedy passing of that bill into legislation. As we wrap up our conversation this morning, Madam, please talk to us about the details of the discussion, when and where.
The discussion of the dog bill?
No, the discussion about why it's necessary for you to gain access to buildings, amongst others.
Okay. We have different places that we need to visit as persons with visual impairments. And if these places or buildings are not accessible, it means we are left out. So in the sense of, if I can pinpoint hospitals, universities, and other important offices, they need to be accessible by everyone, including persons with disabilities.
Are you hosting a public discussion about that?
We have. We are busy organizing a training on the rights of persons with disabilities, which will take place on the 26th and the 27th of July, which is, I think, after next week. And this training is quite broad compared to all the trainings that we have hosted or conducted, because it will incorporate all the articles in the UNCRPD, and it will also bring together all stakeholders, including government, private parastatals, and NGOs.
Any final thoughts, Madam, before we let you go?
Okay, I just want to emphasize on the accessibility. I just want to urge government and other stakeholders to ensure that visually impaired persons have access to information, to buildings, public transport, and roads. And this will be for the benefit of both parties.
Thank you very much for your time. Thank you for sharing expertise, and thank you for continuing to fight the good fight.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
There you have it, Madam Mwaka Mutenda-Mukweli, Human Rights Project Manager at the Namibia Federation for the Visually Impaired, talking to us about the rights accruing to those with visual impairment and what it is that we need to do as a bare minimum to accommodate them. We will be right back after a brief break.